Welcome to Eston Square. Eston Mines was the single largest mine in Cleveland, and in just after 1909 this building was built. It's now a working men's club, but it was built as the Miners' Institute. You'll notice the plaque on the side about Eston Mines, and also on the front the title Eston Institute built into the wall. The institutes were designed for the miners as a social space, but also as an educational space. If the miner didn't want to go into the pubs for an alcoholic drink, they could get refreshments, they could attend lectures, take courses, or play games. Coming just a little way left or west along the high street, we come to this site. It's now residential housing, but this was the site of the Miners' Hospital. This is the original gateway, and you'll notice the two pillars of ironstone which came from Eston Mines. The Miners' Hospital, you've got to remember the mines existed in the days before the NHS, and the mining industry is very, very dangerous. Prior to the hospital being built, miners would be treated if they were injured in their own home, but they decided to club together and pay an amount out of their own wages, supported by the employers, and they built a hospital here with 22 beds, staffed by some nurses and with visiting doctors. If they continued paying out of the wages, they were entitled, and their families were entitled, to use the facilities of the hospital. Eston was a dangerous mine. I think in its lifetime there were over 400 fatalities. Again, we've come a couple of hundred yards further to the west along Eston High Street. We've reached these. Eston Mines, as we said, were very large. The ore was brought down from the hillside and brought into a tipyard. The tipyard was behind these buildings, and the sandstone wall there at the right hand end, I believe, is the remains of the bridge by which this road crossed over the mine tramway. Once in the yard, the mine tubs were emptied into standard gauge railway trucks, and they then went down to the riverside and the blast furnaces. The mine tipyard also housed a series of workshops and stores of equipment to be used in the mine. The buildings here are actually mine related. The larger one to the right was the mine office. This dealt with pay, the administration, ordering of stores and supplies. And to the left we have two houses which were originally undermanagers' houses. So the undermanagers were part of the hierarchy working in the mine. Originally, I believe there were 4 of these houses, but there are now 2 left. All of these are now private residences. Just across the road from the tipyard is the area of Eston known as California. It was called that after the California gold rush because people believed that the mines would bring huge wealth. Indeed, people flocked from all over the country, Devon, Cornwall, Ireland, all over, to come and participate in the new wealth. When they came, there was very little here, so the mine owners hurriedly built California. These are some of the original houses. The one on the left was probably originally built as a chapel, a primitive Methodist chapel, but as you'll see, they are small houses. A lot of them were originally one up, one down houses, literally one room downstairs and then a bedroom upstairs in the rafters. We'll see some more of this further up. We've come up slightly up the road, and this is Old Row. This is one of the first rows of miners' cottages to be built back in around 1860. These houses were originally back to back, so the apex of the roof here marked the dividing line between 2 houses, one either side. They were single story when they were built of sandstone, and as I say, there were one room downstairs with a ladder up to a sleeping area in the eaves of the roof. Eventually, later on, a second story was added from brick, and the houses were knocked through. So what you see now is one house front to back. If we look along the row, you will see further up there is one house that still shows the original height, the stone base of the house, and the upper story, which was added later of brick, has been rendered. So you can see the original size of them from that. You can also see how close we are to the hills. Here we are at the top of the road, the end of Old Row, and this was essentially the base of the 3 inclines that led up to the mine entrances. You can still see off to the left one of the original stone walls. We also have here a memorial to the mines and the miners. The Eston mine started with quarrying along the face of the hillside in the open. Once the open ironstone had been removed, then they dug in with what's called a drift entrance, which is an inclined tunnel. So rather than a shaft with a cage, you can walk into a drift entrance. Eston got so big that there were 3 in this area. There were other entrances elsewhere, but 3 here. And each one had what's called an incline, basically a track down. And this was a railway, a rope-hauled railway. We'll talk more about that later. But this is where the 3 inclines came down. The one on the left is New Bank, straight ahead was Old Bank, and to the right was Trustee. And at the bottom here there was a brake drum, and then rails from here down to the mine yard. Where the last video clip was, the incline starts, but because of all the new building you have to take a slight detour along a footpath and then through an underpass which takes you under the parkway, the A174. We've done that and climbed maybe 50 feet further up, and we are now on one of the mine inclines. As I said before, there were 3 of these. The one we're on currently, which is by far the best preserved, is New Bank. So as the name suggests, it wasn't the first. The first was Old Bank, then came New Bank, and after that the third one, Trustee. So what are inclines? Well, the iron ore was put into tubs in the mine and brought to the surface, and then there had to be a way of getting it down the hillside, which here is quite steep. So the incline was built and laid with rail lines, and the full tubs will load down it to the mine yard at the bottom. Now inclines work in different ways. Some of them are what are called self-acting. So basically there would be 2 lines of tracks. The heavy full tubs would be attached to a rope on one side, which would go around a brake drum at the top, and the rope on the other side will be attached to a set of empty tubs at the bottom, which obviously are lighter. The weight of the full tubs as they went down the hill would pull the empties up, and the speed was controlled by the brake drum at the top. Others used permanent rope haulage, so an engine would be used to raise and lower the tubs up the incline. But you have to imagine originally this had, for most of the way up, 2 tracks of rails, 2 rail tracks, with one portion I think in the middle where it went down to single track, but the 2 track areas were where the tubs going up and the tubs going down would pass each other. So this is New Bank Incline. So in total, we're looking back down the incline now. We've walked about a 1/4 of a mile from the houses to the top of the incline. So if we turn round, we will see in amongst the vegetation, we can't see anything at the moment, but a few steps further on we will come across the drum house, or what is left of it. You can see on the left here a large concrete wall. Yeah, that is one side of the structure that supported the brake and hauling drum, and you can still see the mounting bolts in the top. It's quite a large structure this. It's about 10 foot from ground to top, and if we look across to the other side of the incline, there's its partner, a bit more overgrown, with a retaining wall just hidden in the foliage behind it. Well, that's the other side of the drum house, and our track goes on slightly from here. Right, we've walked just a few yards on from the bank top. You can see the top of the concrete wall that held the drum. So this was the railway line that came along. There was quite a lot up here originally. If you look down in the ground, you will see lots and lots of bricks which form foundations of boiler houses, winding engine houses, etc. One of the interesting things to note with this, I've tried to clean it off, if you look at that brick, it's marked B, V and Co. Balco, Vaughan and Company. Yeah, and most of them are marked that way. Now, a lot of the mines, when they first dug them, they dug through clay, and the mine owners would take the clay out, and a lot of them built their own brickworks and turned the clay into bricks. So, Balco and Vaughan bricks, cheaper than buying them. The brickworks that served most of these was at Normanby. It's now Flats Lane Country Park. If we look along there, you will see a track continues. That is a railway line. That railway line went right the way around the front of the hills, past Wilton Bank, almost to Gisborough, where there was another entrance to the mine at Challoner Pit. We will follow that way along shortly. There are a couple of other entrances and fan houses along there to look at. But New Bank was built for one reason. And if we turn round, we will see here we have a drift entrance. A bit difficult in the sun, so I'll change the angle so you can see it properly. There we go. This is New Bank entrance. Again, if you look at it, it's an arched brick built drift entrance. Remember I said a drift is an incline tunnel that you can actually walk into. If you look at the bricks, they're the same as those I showed you in the ground. They're cream bricks, they will be stamped Balco and Vaughan. And look at the thickness of it. 3 to 4 bricks thick here, it's probably more deeper in. Originally, this drift was for digging ironstone out, which would then be, the tubs would be brought up on rails, hitched to the rope at the top of the incline and dropped down. Later on, it was used as what's called a fan drift. So these foundations here and some of the others that are hidden in the undergrowth would have housed boiler houses and a huge fan. And the fan works a bit like a hairdresser. It sucks the air out of the drift, out of the mine, and blows it up a chimney. In the early days usually driven by steam engines, hence the boiler houses and things. This drift at one point was closed and then reopened. So if we go a little bit closer, by the time the drift was reopened, the fans had gone. They reopened it to work a little bit of extra stone. So what they then did was they built this. And this is a furnace foundation. So originally this would have been right up to the top, and the side where the ramp is to gain entrance would have had a door on it. And if you light a huge fire in there, then it will heat the air and it will rise up a chimney. And the action of doing that will suck bad air from out of the mine. Okay, we can go in a little way, but as you'll see at the back, this drift is blocked. Actually, some silly person has put a hole in the brick wall, but just behind it, it's collapsed anyway. It's worth bearing in mind that these places are about 100 years old. This is safe to come in a few yards. It is not safe to go any further. Okay, but you'll see the quality of the brickwork. Considering this dates from approximately 1860, it's still in very good condition. Okay, so that's New Bank drift. And the foundations of the furnace, and outside the foundations of the fan. Yeah, we're still at New Bank top, so our drift entrance is just in there. We're going to head off along the track, but I just thought I would show you the substantial concrete foundations that still exist here. I say there were boiler houses and many other buildings up here. It was quite a large and very active area. What we also have in there is a huge sandstone structure, which may have been part of a loading area, but I think is more likely to have been part of the haulage system for the railway track, which went along here. And say it went along here and almost round to Gisborough. If you look closely in the floor, there is still a cast iron pipe half embedded in the floor. Don't know what it would have been, possibly steam, possibly water. You can still see a flange sticking up there where two sections of pipe are joined. So we've just walked possibly 300-400 yards along the old railway track from Newbank Top, and here we have another fan house. This one is much smaller, and this would have been an electric fan, probably a fan called a Sirocco. All the fans work in the same way. It is very much like a hairdryer. They rotate at very high speed, or quite high speed. They suck the bad air into the centre of the fan and blow it out the sides, sometimes up a chimney or sometimes just out. So out here would have been the foundations for the actual motor for the fan, and there is the connection for the fan into the mine itself. Again, you can see that there is a slight entrance, but that it doesn't go very far. It's very much blocked up. But again, this is purely, it was never intended to be a way in and out for people. It's purely for ventilation. Now, interesting bit with this is the shape of the earthworks outside. And they're to do with airflow, and probably partly to do with being able to reverse the airflow. So normally a mine fan will suck bad air out and doesn't blow in. But for some reasons, if some disasters happen inside the mine, it is useful to be able to reverse them and blow fresh air into the mine. And that's probably the reason for the shape of this foundation work outside. Right, we'll go on a bit further westwards along the old railway line. We're still on the old railway track. We've walked perhaps 3/4 of a mile along, half a mile to 3/4 of a mile, and here we have a substantial stone bridge. This bridge was built to take an old earth road from Lazenby to Gisborough over the railway track. Let's say this track actually goes most of the way to Gisborough, but we're not going to go much further, just the other side of the bridge. Okay, we've walked about 100-150 yards past that substantial bridge, and I'm now standing at the upper end of a fan drift. So you can just see vaguely in the darkness the lines of brickwork which line the tunnel that goes into the hillside. If I turn round, this is a slightly inclined tunnel, and if I turn round you will see the huge circular hole there was the inlet to the fan. The fan was in the next chamber along, and the arch-shaped chamber is where the driving rod came through to drive the fan from the steam engine the other side. This could be used as an access to the mine, but normally it was purely ventilation for the fan. This, when I was a child, was always known as the SS Castle, and when we get outside you will see why. The fan drift did have a man entrance, so it could, in theory, be used for access to the mine. The entrance was probably also used for people to check the fan and to check the condition of the drift itself. I'm stood right at the top, right adjacent to the inlet to the fan. So if we look in the next chamber, that's where the fan was. The circular line that you can vaguely see down there, the transition between the dark wall and the light, is where the fan would have run. It would have been 40, maybe 50 feet in diameter, with a series of vanes going round, and it would rotate just over one rotation every second. Basically, it acts like a hairdryer. This circular hole here sucks the air into the centre of the fan, and the blades throw the air out and into that chimney where you can see the light coming in. All mine fans basically would run to pull bad air out of the mine, and the fresh air would flow in through other entrances. So yeah, quite a large fan. The one in here was called a Griebel fan, which is the guy who designed it, who was a Belgian. But it's a very large chamber. We'll go outside now and take a look into the engine chamber. So we've come to the other side of the fan chamber. That's the gridded drive shaft that we could see from the other side. And this chamber here, which originally would have had a roof on, you can still see the roof line, would have held the steam engine that powered the fan. Yeah. And if we turn around, we can see outside, with some visitors here, the foundations that would have had the boilers to power the steam engine. So we're here outside. On the right hand side you can see angling down the drift that we were stood in earlier on. That goes into the hillside and into the mine. Then next to that we have the fan chamber with its huge chimney where the air was exhausted. Next to that again we have the engine chamber, and then the foundations that probably held the boiler. I grew up in this area 50 odd years ago, and even then this place was known as the SS Castle. Basically the shape of the wall braces, the S's there, makes it obvious to a child that it's going to be the SS Castle. Here we are with a view down on Eston from Eston Nab itself. There were 3 inclines from Eston. From here you can see the site of the mine yard, which is the green area roughly in the middle. You can see a green line that points up over in the picture but towards the river, which is the line that the railway took to connect the mine yard with the blast furnaces. And we can see California. Now, the 3 inclines went in a fan shape from the point at the bottom of the hills up to the 3 main entrances. We came up Newbank, which goes diagonally from left to right through these trees, to Newbank top, which is hidden just down there. If we look in that field, we can see just right of centre a point of bushes going down towards the road. That was Old Bank Incline, and the drift for that was just above the tree line. If we look further across, we can see another finger which goes diagonally across the field from left to right towards the road. In this you can just see some horses at the right hand end of the bank of trees. That was Trustee Incline. The lower end's lost because of the road and the housing, but that marks the line of Trustee Incline up to Trustee Drift, which again was just down there in the rough ground, almost on the line of where the pylons run. So Eston Nab is a prominent landmark in the area. Everybody, even sort of comers to the area, will see the sandstone monument, the Nab itself. What a lot of people don't know is how long this place has been inhabited. The Nab, the sandstone Nab that we see now, which is just a monument, was built from the stones salvaged from a building that stood here that was built in approximately 1808 as a Napoleonic watchtower. Obviously the need for a watchtower lapsed and it became a private house, and in times gone past it was quite common for people from down below to walk up here and to buy homemade ice cream, glasses of milk, and enjoy a day out on the Nab. But the history of this place goes back much further. If we pan round a little, we can see here a ditch and bank. So the whole of the area of the Nab is a scheduled ancient monument, and this is the remains of, I believe, an Iron Age settlement, a ring ditch and bank that went all the way around, enclosing a full area inside. We're going to walk a little bit further to the south, and regardless of the beautiful views, in the days of the Ironstone mine, this was a working area. So as you can see, we've walked a kilometre or so to the south of Eston Nab, which is where the aerials are on the horizon. Quite a good track, which brings you out here. We're quite a long way from anywhere. We're probably another 2 miles to go to the Gisborough Road behind us. So far, what we've talked about with Eston Mines is we've talked about drift entrances, but they weren't everything. There was actually a shaft as well, and this is the site of the shaft. In fact, 2 shafts. This, what you can see here, looks basically like a spoil heap, but the shafts were here, and the remains on the surface, which are not hugely significant, they're much better to see in winter than in summer. If we walk back across this area, to here, you will see the start of a large concrete foundation, and if we go a few yards further which again is clear, you will see a huge concrete slab. Mounting bolts sticking up from it, further foundations off to the side. And if we look at this, you will see there is a hole in the centre which is full of vegetation, but there is a hard edge to it. You can see the edge of the stone there underneath the vegetation. It's clearer there, you can see the drop in, and again foundation bedstone all around. So this is what was known as pit top on Barnaby Moor. These foundations are for the winding engines and the mine towers that supported the cages in the shafts. If a miner was late going to work on a morning, then he would have to walk up the hillside to Eston, across the top to here, and from 10 minutes to 6 in the morning this was the only way he could get into the mine to do his shift, because the drift entrances after that time would be full of tubs of ironstone and far too dangerous for a man to walk in or out. So yep, this is pit top. Very isolated, but in fact in those days not as isolated as now, because there was a small village up here, and we'll show you the only remainder of that in a moment. We've come a few hundred yards further south from pit top, which is over behind those trees. I hasten to add we've come on a good path, not through that. This area is very overgrown in summer. However, pit top, as I said, was a settlement, a very small village. There was a row of houses which went from just in front of where I'm standing off in that direction, westerly. One row with a split in the middle. Most of them were cottages, but on one end was a house that was used as a school with a tin shack on the end as well. One teacher, possibly one of the first examples of integrated schooling, since boys and girls and all ages more or less were in together. There's very little remaining. In fact, the only thing that is remaining is this, the village well. This is where they got the water supply from. Living up here would have been quite harsh. The nearest shop is over 2 miles away in either direction, and quite often provisions would be ordered from a shop down in Eston, brought in and into one of the drift mines along to pit bottom and hoisted up the shaft, and then one of the children would walk the few hundred yards or so to the shaft to pick up their food. It's also worth noting this was a God-fearing group. Most miners were quite religious, and this community was no different. There was a chapel, a wooden chapel, in between the row of houses and pit top. Nothing whatsoever left of it now, but services were held there for this community. All of this area was abandoned as the further reaches of the mine were worked out, and they worked back towards the drift entrances on the front of the hills. And it was abandoned, fell into disrepair, and now has been reclaimed by nature. Okay, we've come about 2/3 of the way down the front of the hills, and here we have this unremarkable area of rutted mud and clay. And there's nothing here now, but in those trees was old bank drift. Originally there was a drift entrance here, the first one in Eston Mine. Winding engines, tally cabin, a number of other buildings. Railway lines from here went down Old Bank Incline. If we turn round again, although it doesn't look obvious, that is the top of Old Bank Incline. There is a small footpath that goes down it, but other than that there are no visible remains left on the surface. Okay, this remain is quite well hidden. Unless you know how to get to it, you won't find it. You can actually see it on Google Maps, just most of the way towards the top of the trusty incline. And this is a powder house. The outer wall that you can see here is a blast wall. The powder house itself is built into the hillside. I'll take you in there in a minute. The blast wall was designed, as it says, to contain or direct a blast in a particular direction. The miners in the early days had to buy their own powder and their own explosive, and they would come here before they went into the drift, and the powder man inside would have made up what they'd requested and would sell them their powder for the day. Now, if you do come here now, I will warn you, as you can see from the amount of graffiti, it's treated by some people as a bit of a playground. There's a lot of empty cans and broken glass, so if you do come here, you need stout shoes on. I have boots on, which are prone to anything, or protect from anything. So in here, as you can see, the courtyard, glass wall, and there is the actual powder house. The entrance is in the open, but it sits back into the hillside. So let's walk across, and you can see the thickness of the walls here. The lobby is where the miners would come to talk to the powder man and receive their day's equipment. If we go inside, you can see there are two chambers. So one chamber would hold the explosive itself, and the other chamber would probably hold the primer or fuses. It has a barrel roof for strength, and you can see grooves in the wall that go right round, which probably had wooden shelves in them to store the powder and other things in. I'm not going to go in any further because, as you can see, the floor's in a bit of a state inside, but all in all the building is quite well preserved. So this is the last of the major remains we'll see today. As I say, considering the misuse it gets these days, it's still in remarkably good condition. And this was the powder house for Trustee Drift.